Hey guys, we're going to look at Section 4 today. Section 4 is all about the Constitutional Convention. If you remember from Section 3, that was about the Articles of Confederation, our very first Constitution for the United States. And we talked about the powers that the federal government had under the Articles, but we mainly focused on the weaknesses of the Articles because the Articles really were weak. If you remember, whenever I talked about breaking away, I gave the example of a pendulum swinging back and forth. And England was way over here. England's government, King George III, the tyrant, way over here. So we broke away and we created a government that had a very weak central government. So it was way over on this side. That didn't work either. And we said, we need to find something else. A super strong government isn't good, and a super weak government isn't good. We need to find something in the middle, like a pendulum swinging. And so in early 1787, they called for a meeting in Philadelphia to, quote, revise the Articles, that we were going to just tweak them. Now, some people knew right away, like Patrick Henry, said something along the lines of, I smell a rat. This is not good. I know what's coming. I know they are going to overhaul the Articles, and I don't want that. So some people knew what was likely going to happen. But the intent was to make changes because the way things were going under the Articles just wasn't working. And so they're going to meet in Philadelphia starting in late May of 1787. And what we're going to see is that this Constitution is chock full of compromises. It's all about different sides, different factions, giving and taking. And so that's what we're going to really focus on today. We're going to talk about the meeting and some of the other things, but we're really going to focus on compromises. So here are the details. Late May 1787, 12 out of the 13 states sent delegates to Philadelphia. The Virginia delegates showed up first, actually about 2 or 3 weeks early they showed up, and they started they started plotting or planning for the convention. Rhode Island didn't show up. They liked the Articles. They liked having a strong state government and a weak national government. They decided, whenever the delegates met, whenever there's finally a quorum, May 25th, 1787, they decided that everything was going to be in secret. There was no leaks to the press, no people in the peanut gallery listening or watching in. They closed the curtains at the convention hall, that it was going to be quiet, that no one was going to say anything. Some more details. There were 55 delegates who showed up. 75% of them had served in the Second Continental Congress. So it's almost like a carryover from the Second Continental Congress to now. There were several who had signed the Declaration of Independence. George Washington was the president of the convention. He was unanimously selected president of the convention. James Madison was there. He is known as the father of the Constitution. He also wrote the Bill of Rights. He took very detailed notes about the convention. And so when people want to go back and try to figure out what were the framers thinking, one of the things they look to is James Madison's writings, this journal that he kept that discussed everything at the meeting. There's just a chart that shows some of the big wigs at the convention. You can pause this video real fast and take a look at it. I'm going to go on and move on. The first thing that the delegates had to agree on was, okay, if we are going to scrap the Articles, which they decided that the Articles were too far gone to be kept, they have to come up with a new form of government. And they said, okay, that's the first thing we have to do. Before we can do anything else, we have to figure out what type of government are we having. Virginia, who had been there a couple weeks prior, came out with their plan. that we call the Virginia Plan. James Madison was largely responsible for the Virginia Plan, and here's what the Virginia Plan called for. 3 branches of government: a legislative, executive, and judicial. The legislative branch would be bicameral, so it's going to be a 2-house legislature. In the lower house, it would be based on population. Representation is based on population. And then the lower house would elect people to the upper house. With the executive branch, there would be a chief administrator. They didn't use the word president at that time, but there was going to be one person to run the executive branch. And then they were going to have a multi-tiered judicial branch, different levels of courts. This plan called for a strong government. This government would have the power to make laws, to collect taxes, to regulate interstate commerce, and even to override state laws. A lot of this should sound familiar. A lot of this is what we have today. The Virginia Plan was favored by large states. Large states loved the Virginia Plan. Why? Because of the legislature. It's all based on population. So the more people you have in your state, the more power you have. Smaller states did not like it. Smaller states said, whoa, nope. This is giving large states too much power. We are all equal, just like the Articles. Every state got one vote because we are equal. We are in this together. And so small states rejected the Virginia Plan. So they came up with their own plan. A couple weeks later, we have the New Jersey Plan, which the small states liked. Here's what they had. They called for a legislative branch, and it was going to be a unicameral legislature. So 1-house legislature, and each state would get 1 vote. The large states didn't like it. The large states didn't like it because the small states retained the power. The New Jersey Plan was very similar to the Articles of Confederation. Small states liked it. They had power. They had just as much power as Virginia and Pennsylvania and New York. They liked it. And so their plan is going to mimic the Articles. So right now we're at a stalemate. We have the Virginia Plan favored by large states, the New Jersey Plan favored by small states. Both of them were rejected. Neither of them got a majority vote in the convention. So the delegates formed a grand committee where one delegate from each state came together and they tried to work out a compromise. And they did come out with a compromise. And we call it the Great Compromise, and it's also called the Connecticut Compromise. Exact same thing. And what they did is they said, okay, we have the Virginia Plan, we have the New Jersey Plan. Let's put them in together, mix them up, and let's take some stuff from the Virginia Plan, some stuff from the New Jersey Plan, and we can all compromise. I don't want to say mostly. A large chunk of it is the Virginia Plan. Not all of it, but a large chunk. The Great Compromise, or the Connecticut Compromise, called for 3 branches of government: a legislative, executive, and judicial, just like the Virginia Plan. The legislature would be bicameral. Again, the Virginia Plan. The lower house is going to be based on population, the Virginia Plan. But the upper house was equal representation. That the upper house, the Senate, was going to have 2 members from each state, regardless of the state's population. The lower house was going to be elected by the people, and then the upper house was going to be selected by the state legislatures, not the people themselves, but the representatives in the state legislatures would pick them. This was a big compromise. Neither side got everything that they wanted. So it was not a perfect compromise, but it laid the foundation. Because from there, we could move on to other things. We couldn't work on anything else. We couldn't work on, okay, what's the judicial branch going to look like if we didn't know we were going to have a judicial branch? And we didn't know what to do with population or how to count people if we didn't know what form of government we were going to have. So we couldn't do anything until this compromise was reached. There were a lot of other compromises. We have compromises over slavery. The southern states said slaves should count in our population. Northern states are saying, no way. You don't consider slaves people. You call them property. They shouldn't count as population. If you're not going to give them the right to vote, they shouldn't be counted in your population for representation. And so that was a conflict. And we reached a compromise, and we call it the 3/5 compromise, which said for every 5 slaves, we would count 3 as towards their representation, towards their population. So for every 5 slaves there were, 3 of them counted for the population. Another compromise over slavery is the slave trade. Southern states said continue it. Northern states said ban it. So what did we do? We said we won't do anything on the slave trade for the next 20 years. Nothing, that the federal government can't do anything about the slave trade for 20 years. So that was a compromise. And you see these different groups. We have small states, large states having to compromise. Northern states, southern states, or free and slave states having to compromise. So there's all sorts of different factions having to compromise on or with the Constitution. This chart is really good. This is all about the Great Compromise. We can look at the elements of the Virginia Plan, the elements of the New Jersey Plan, and what was eventually settled on with the Connecticut Compromise or the Great Compromise. If you look at how will Congress pass laws, Virginia Plan with just a majority, New Jersey Plan, a supermajority, and the compromise was majority vote, but the president can veto it. So you can pause this, look at these questions on the left under the key issues, and then look at how each plan, look at each plan's solution to those issues, and then take a look at what was eventually included in the Constitution. So go on and pause it now, and then pick it back up when you're done looking at this. Some more compromises, how we were going to elect the president. Some people said the people should elect him. It should be a popular vote of the president. Other people said the Congress should select the president. Some people said the state legislature should select the president. So there's all sorts of different ideas. The compromise was we were going to have state electors. And the way this works, this is the Electoral College right here, is that it's kind of based on population, but it's also based on equal representation. That for voting for president, the number of electors each state gets is based on the number of people they have in the House of Representatives and in Congress. So Missouri, for instance, right now has 8 members in the House and 2 senators. So we have 10 electoral votes when it comes to voting for president. Now, what we do whenever we vote for president, we're not actually voting for that person. We are voting for a slate of electors. We are voting for these people, a slate, a list of these 10 people to go to Washington, D.C. and officially vote for president. And we are telling our preference. We are saying we want, in this case, Donald Trump or Joe Biden or Jill Jorgensen to be president. And whoever gets the most votes in Missouri, that slate of electors will get sent to Washington, D.C. With the, I had a student come in. What happens is if no candidate gets a majority of votes, then it goes to the House of Representatives. And in the House of Representatives, each state gets 1 vote to pick for their choice for president. and then the Senate would get to pick the vice president. So you can see with this electoral college, it's a jumble of the different ideas. Some people wanted the people to pick the president. Well, we kind of do. We pick the electors. Some people wanted the state legislatures to pick the president. Well, the states pick the electors. And then some people wanted Congress to pick the president. Well, Congress can pick the president, the House can pick the president, if the Electoral College doesn't get a majority. And so we see all sorts of compromises. And that's what I've said this about 5 or 6 times already. That's what this Constitution is all about, compromises. That we have different sides and each side has to give and take. And everyone knew this. Everyone knew that you had to compromise, that no one was going to get everything that they wanted. If one side wouldn't budge, like if the northern states said, no, we are not going to allow slavery under any conditions, we probably wouldn't have had this Constitution. So everyone compromised. Ben Franklin said this was as close to perfect as possible. Some delegates, though, refused to sign it. They're like, no, I still don't like it. It doesn't go far enough, or it goes too far. But it was passed. It was passed. It was in September of 1787, and then it went for ratification. With ratification, the Constitution said it would require 9 out of the 13 states to approve it. And once the 9th state approved it, then this new Constitution would replace the Articles of Confederation. That's all that I've got for the Constitutional Convention. That's a lot in a short amount of time. Basically, just keep in mind, here's the 6th or 7th time, it's all about compromises. Compromises over slavery, compromises over representation, compromises over how to count people, compromises over the election of the president, all sorts of compromises. What we're going to look at next is ratifying the Constitution. How are the states going to react whenever they see this new Constitution? Some people are going to love it. Some people are going to hate it. And we are going to have a fight on our hands to get it ratified.